Ladies and gentlemen, we are live and on the air. Welcome to another Live with Dr. McDougall webinar. I am Gustavo Tolosa. I'm a pianist and I'm also a passionate advocate of the whole food, plant-based diet movement. And today we have two, not just one, two just legendary figures and two of the most beloved and well-known men who have saved thousands of lives, and they continue to have a great impact in the world of plant-based nutrition. So I want to introduce you today to Dr. John McDougall and Dr. T. Colin Campbell. How are you doing, gentlemen?
Oh, just fine, Gustavo. Today is February 21st, 2019. We keep doing these live, even though there may be technical problems. I just think live brings more excitement to the presentation. So we try and do it at 11 o'clock in the morning, every other Thursday morning, and this will be February 21st, 2019, that I have the special opportunity of having a longtime friend who happens to be one of the 4 recipients of the Lifestyle Achievement Award. I happen to be 4th. He preceded me, as did Esselstyn and Ornish. Our guest I've known for, oh my goodness, maybe 35 years. And he is a dietitian. No, not a dietitian, a PhD in nutrition. The dietetics is his field, and his orientation is toward dietitians and nutritionists, not medical doctors. And along the way, our guest has deferred to me when medical questions came up. But there's a reason for that. And of course, that's because I'm a medical doctor. But what he and I realized early on was that the medical doctors weren't going to listen to me. Dietitians did. Nutritionists listened to me because I wasn't threatening to them. Medical doctors would listen to our guest because he wasn't a medical doctor and he wasn't threatening to them. But the dietitians and nutritionists didn't get along with him at all. Well, I'll tell you, this man, Dr. T. Colin Campbell, my friend for, oh my goodness, must be 35 years, we've been fighting on both sides of the fence. The medical business and the nutrition business was really ought to be joined together. I mean, I told dietitians 45 years ago, they have more opportunity to help people than any other doctor, any place in the whole world, just by fixing the food problems. And so a powerful arm. I would like to introduce Dr. T. Colin Campbell. And do you remember Dr. Campbell? Just to start out with, do you remember our first meeting was on my KSR radio show? Must have been in the early 90s. You just come out with a paper called The China Study, which was declared by the New York Times to be one of the best epidemiologic studies ever done in the entire world history. I called you up and I said, Dr. T. Colin Campbell, you very famous man who had New York Times, and you did this great study on Chinese people and what they ate and the diseases and so on. Would you be a guest on my radio show? And you agreed. And that was a life changer for both of us. Do you remember that day, Dr. Campbell?
I sure do. I remember. And then later coming out to your studio. I think it was in Southern California, as I recall.
Well, that was
that was a big day. That really was.
Well, when we met, let's go back into your history a little bit. First of all, I think people need to know how old you are. I'm nearly 72. I really would be pleased if I had the health and personal appearance that you have at your age. And you are how old, Dr. Campbell, now?
In 2 weeks, I'll be 85.
85 years old. And the thing that people need to know about you is you're a very functional 85. I mean, you travel all over the country with your sons, Tom, who's a medical doctor, and Nelson, who's an advocate of health. I mean, you and he just did a nationwide tour at 85 years old, and it's just amazing. You are an example of what good nutrition can mean. But let's go back to that day on the radio show. I have to believe that I made a positive difference in your life on that day. Do you remember what I told you that day?
I don't remember exactly. I was I knew that we had a kinship. That was for sure. Uh,
Well, let me tell you as I remember it. You had studied the Chinese people. You found that those who had 30% fat intake in their diet and above had high rates of breast cancer and other common diseases. And those who had a fat intake of 7% or less had the fewest breast cancers, and there was no cutoff. It was all the way from 40% to 7%. In other words, there wasn't a threshold where, say, you ate 20% fat, you stopped having an increased risk of breast cancer. It went straight line. And so at that time, at least my impression was that you were still weren't sure how much fat you should have in the diet. And I asked you, Dr. T. Colin Campbell, on that KSRO radio show, okay, if your studies show that the least risk of diseases, heart disease, diabetes, breast cancer, etc., are lowest with the lowest fat intake, which is less than 10%, which is what I had always recommended, which is 7%. Why don't you recommend 10% or less? I ask you. Do you remember that?
of course. As a matter of fact, at that point about something I thought was more reasonable to talk about 15%. If we could get down to that low, or so forth and so on. That at least that was on the radio, and you corrected me. You pushed me. You said, wait a minute. You were the first one to start telling me that getting down to 15%, which I thought was really low. I mean, in my profession, 20% is an exaggeration, if you will. You said no, it was 10%. I mean that was, yes, I remember that very well. I think I argued with you a little bit about it, but anyhow, that's what you said, and I sort of kept it.
Well, you certainly look like it, and you certainly function like it. You're like one of those old Chinese people who live in the rural country, work hard, get some sunshine, and live on a diet that's about 90% rice.
That's right. Sit there with the birds.
Well, tell us a little bit about, you're 85 years old. You've been a Cornell University nutrition professor for many years. I had a chance to come out and talk to your students. You've had some contesting with the people at Cornell, to say the least. And just to fill in people, just to cover this part of the history quickly, you started out on a dairy farm, your family did. Can you tell us how you went from a dairy farm to a PhD nutrition expert, world-renowned, that condemns dairy and fought in China to keep it out? What happened? How did you make that change?
Well, it wasn't just me. I mean, I had some really good people, older men in most cases, looking out for me. I mean, something would happen. I went to veterinary school and left behind I went to veterinary school a year early than, my fourth year. I was at Penn State. And when I went there, I intended to be a veterinarian. That was it. But then my mentor back at Penn State had alerted somebody at Cornell that I might be good for coming to graduate school at Cornell. So all of a sudden I came home one day near the end of my first year in veterinary school, and I had a telegram. And I was offered a fellowship to come to Cornell and do my graduate studies. And that happened to me several times when I was in those younger years. And so I really am, I'm really grateful to the people who did that for me. I seem like I didn't go out and sort of seek it or compete for it, that sort of stuff. They just, in the older days, that's the way it happened. So, yeah. And anyhow, being on the dairy farm, I didn't think obviously too much about nutrition, but when I got into school, I knew well that the most important nutrient we could consume was high quality protein. That was it. And that meant animal protein. And so when I got into my graduate studies, especially my PhD, I was working for a professor then whose father was a butcher. And he, in turn, was all about, doing research on animal protein. So that was my thesis. So all of a sudden, that my personal background and then my graduate student background, same thing, pushing protein, animal protein. That was it. And I didn't change too much of that idea until I was at Virginia Tech, and I was working on a project in the Philippines where my senior colleague, who was very nice to me, brought me out to the Philippines, and I worked with him and And then I saw something out there that didn't quite square with that. We were going to the Philippines to make sure those kids got enough protein, like we do in the West. And it turned out this wasn't published at the time. I just, without going to the details, I learned that kids about 4 years of age and younger were more susceptible to get liver cancer. I really didn't believe it because that was my second topic of interest was cancer, liver cancer. And so I kind of monkeyed around with the idea. I mean, it wasn't published anyplace. And then I saw a report from India where some researchers there was testing the effect of protein on liver cancer that was initiated by a carcinogen. And so what they found was exactly the opposite of what they thought they were hoping to see, namely that higher protein, in this case animal protein, actually caused those cancers to go much faster. It was really a huge effect. So all of a sudden, then my world started to break down. I mean, to think the idea that animal protein might turn on cancer, even if it's experimental, I mean, it was such a huge effect. I had to sit back and think about it. It took me a couple of years, I guess, before we did more research and kind of sunk in finally. I said, there's a new world out there. So that was it.
Well, that's pretty much what people would identify you. They would talk about Esselstyn and they'd say, well, he doesn't recommend any nuts. I think if people were going to say one word about T. Colin Campbell, it would, or one sentence, it would be about your strong belief that it is protein, particularly animal protein, and maybe more specifically dairy protein, that turns on a gene which initiates and or promotes cancer. That's where you get most of your criticism, Dr. Campbell. I mean, if you were just a nice guy and stood out there and told people to eat more broccoli and cut down on or skin their chicken, you'd be okay. But instead, you tell people that eating all that animal protein, particularly dairy, causes and promotes cancer.
Well, you could tell that story again. Ever since those early days, I was trying to be a little cautious, obviously being professional, and I didn't want to go out and say wild things. But over the years, over the next 15 years or so, actually 20 years, we did the research in all kinds of ways. And the more we did, the more convinced I became it was more remarkable. And I got into trouble, big time trouble. And the book that I'm now writing just going to actually tell all people, places, exactly what the questions were. A lot of stuff came my way, and over the years, after a while, I got kind of tired of it. I didn't want that to be concerned with that. So I'd get a letter or something else, and I'd throw it into a file. It was called my garbage file. I had two big, thick garbage files. And so when I sat down to write the book I'm now doing, I got that file out. And I started reading some things in there I never even bothered to read. So I'm going to tell that story, not to complain. I'm not complaining. As a matter of fact, that was a great opportunity because I saw what the pushback really is like. It is pretty, I have to tell you, it is pretty tough. But I had tenure. They tried to get me fired. They tried to get me thrown out of my society, even though I was just nominated to be the president by the council. So all kinds of things. Then they took a grant away from me that I had won from NIH, another grant. So nasty stuff. Really nasty stuff. But, I was close to my dad, and he only had a couple years education. He was a farmer. And he was anxious for us kids to get an education. And I heard him say this so many times. He said, tell the truth, nothing but the truth, and the whole truth. Don't ever forget that. So I didn't forget it. I couldn't forget it. It was part of him, part of me. And there was no second thoughts. If you see something and think it's right, work on it. And then be willing to take the criticism if it comes your way. That's okay too. So.
Well, I'm happy to hear that story, Dr. Campbell, because that was the ED I was raised by. And that is that as long as you tell the truth, it's good. We're getting a little feedback, so I'll go back to you. Anyway, how does Cornell feel about you these days?
Oh, that's another story. I take it really about he. I got along really well at Cornell. We were in a department that had long been recognized as number one in the country, so I was kind of proud of that, if you will. And then I had a big program, and everything was going great. I had lots of students and so forth and so on. In fact, I was friends of three successive presidents of the university who really helped me out. One of them really had something to do with my go to China doing that work. So I was living in heaven. I was doing my thing. And then all of a sudden, about 1990, we had a change in directorships. And I was away at the time. I didn't get to interview him like the other faculty did. But when I came back, we wanted to know each other, and I had a meeting with him, and everything went south. It turned out he was the most significant consultant for the dairy industry in the world. And he also was the director of the Dietary Guidelines program for a while. And he was also at the same time director of the Food Nutrition Board. I mean, these are the two big policy groups in our area. And then he twisted that. And I'm not sure I told you those details, John, but we've been at each other for quite a long time. And he did everything he could possibly do, personal, professional, and everything else. But he had, unfortunately, the backing. He had the backing of some key people at the university who, were close to the industry, not just the dairy, but the livestock industry. And I'm telling that story in my book, as I say, just as an illustration of, what can really happen. And then I go back in history. This book I'm doing now, I went back in the history back to the 1700s. I spent a year at Oxford University, and at that time the heat was on, and I couldn't figure out why I was getting so much hostility. So I decided to go to the library off and on for that year to see if I could learn something. And man, I think I learned something that's really, really exciting. I think I know where a lot of this came from in a sense. I know money's the name of the game. We know that. You know that, of course, well. And as that unfolded, I have to tell you, I really identified with what you did yourself, John. I told you that story. I think I hope you don't mind my saying it again. Back in 1982 or 83 or so, I was made the chairman of a national committee that was supposed to deal with nutrition fraud. And I thought, wow, this is interesting, or whatever. And so I had access to information, who were the people in there that the establishment did not like. And one name came up, top of the list, John McDougall.
Really?
Yes, your book. I think it was 84, if I'm not mistaken. And so I got to know you a little bit, but you didn't know I knew you. But you were a quack. That's what they said. And so one night we were staying overnight with one of my graduate students. Went to see him, and there on the nightstand was this book. And I saw all this stuff that they were calling quack. And this book said, I forget exactly the title, but it was your book. And I picked the thing up. I said, well, let me have a look at this. What's going on here? And I was impressed. I said, wait a minute. What's our committee saying? This guy is not there. And so I really followed you and what you were doing. And well, your courage of standing up to what you stood up for. I mean, that's a big deal.
Well, yeah, I know. Right. Let's talk about something that I think is. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about China. In China, we have a population of people who are at least 60% can't tolerate the sugar in milk called lactose. And the Chinese, about, 20 years ago, somehow or another finagled the dairy industry, or they were in collusion. How's that for the word of the day? They were in collusion. The Chinese were in collusion with the dairy industry to introduce dairy products into China. And here is a population of people who get sick from lactose intolerance. And yet, the Chinese government realizing this, and you tried to fight it. And yet, dairy's a big deal in China, isn't it, these days? How'd that happen? How did they get away with this? Importing a food that makes at least 60% of the population sick.
Yeah, that was a tough one too. I mean, obviously, when I first got my friends in China, they didn't have even any opportunity to go to a Pizza Hut when they're in this country. A lot of cheese on it. They thought it was foul smelling. They didn't want that at all. And in any case, later, one of the big companies, the cereal company, actually sent me to Australia at that time and talk. And it turned out that, and they gave me a first class ticket. I said I don't need a first class ticket, but they got it anyhow. So I went out there. What I'm saying is, it was all kind of arranged that I was going to help them, maybe, to help to set up the industry. Of course, I didn't do that, so I went around a bit with my Chinese friends, and it was tough for them because there was a lot of pressure come from the West, especially the United States and New Zealand. Those are two countries that were really introducing the industry to China, and it only took them, gosh, I think maybe 10, 20 years or so. Not even that, 10, 12 years. Then all of a sudden, the people who could afford milk and dairy, they wanted that because that was Western. You see, you guys in the West, you became what you became because of dairy. I mean, they were being fed this line, and I went around back and forth on that many times. But,
well, if you have a question for Dr. Colin Campbell, this is your opportunity, folks. This is live. This is February 21st, 2019, a little after 11 o'clock a.m. Pacific time. And you call in or write in a chat for a question for Dr. Colin Campbell about his life, about nutrition, about what the right diet is, about some of the controversies he's had. Don't ask him any medical questions because he'll send them off to Dr. Esselstyn or to myself and put us on the spot for medical questions, but he knows the answers anyways. So if you have a question,
Google, there is people are asking what the new books, the title and when will it be available?
Okay, Colin.
Yeah. Okay, it's on the second to last chapter, so I'm hoping to have it all finished writing at least in, let's say, 2 months at the most. And these days, publishers can't publish books pretty quickly compared to what was before. I don't know what the time for publication is. I'm guessing in the fall, about September. I've worked over about 3 or 4 titles, and one of them was Behind the Curtain. Because I'm telling the story as I knew it, being in policy development in Washington, stuff like that for so long. And then being in the laboratory and in that arena, I really saw firsthand how science gets rephrased, or scientific research gets rephrased when it gets to that kettle of fish. So another title was Groupthink. I don't know. Those are just candidate titles. I'm not sure I use either one, but so I want to get into something more, John, than what you and I have been talking about. Just the the chemistry and the biochemistry of what we're talking about. I can just fill in a little bit more. I really became interested in this whole question: why is nutrition so confusing in the West? I mean, now we've worked together on this. We know what we think is the answer to that, but yet it's so difficult. It's so confusing for the public, and medical schools don't teach it. And in my community, research community, I have to say, even people in nutritional science, they've not gone where I've gone to. So I'm writing a book, why is that so? There's some history behind that. Where'd that come from? And I'm really excited about telling that story because back in the 1800s, late 1700s, in fact, there were some debates going on about, how cancer started, for example, and what role, to some extent, what nutrition might play and so forth. That was sort of the 2 topics I was interested in. And as it unfolded, it was very clear. There were 2 main ideas that were debated rather lively in the 1800s. But finally, in the early 1900s, the surgeons kind of took over. They defined what we were supposed to know. That in turn translated into professional societies being formed. And then when you get a society formed, if you're going to belong to the society or going to depend on the funding of the society, you better go along. That's what I call groupthink. That's not my word. That's been discussed a lot, almost as a science in a sense. But these institutions took over. They got all the power. And yet there was information like you and I talk about in the early 1900s. You've quoted a couple yourself. We knew in the early 1900s a lot. Maybe not with the same fancy, this and that details, but we knew a lot of that between 1900 and 1920. It's really remarkable. So then the question becomes, well, why did we remember that? Why did we go off the rails? Well, money plays a role, as we do, but I don't like to focus too much on money because money is the means to carry on, what we tend to believe. So for me, it's more a question, why did individuals at a time when money wasn't so much involved, why did they choose the Western model? It is. It's a lot of fun writing about that stuff. And
well, I have to say that my mind is still too simplistic, and it just comes down to the bottom line of the dollar. I think if we changed the financial motivation, everything would change. And as you and I have discussed in the past, we don't need any more scientific studies to prove that what we say is correct. Right. We just need some kind of implementation. We need to curtail a little bit. I'm sorry, folks, those of us who've been raised in a democratic society, we need to curtail free speech, free trade, freedom to lie and to kill people. We've got to have some kind of government regulation, or you fought with the nutrition industry over the vitamin pills. I mean, good grief, we're talking about billions of dollars, Dr. Campbell.
Yeah, here's my take on it, John. I think we're at about the same place, but the way I tend to talk about it, I'm all for a free market system. Okay, I started out with that premise. So I like to be kind of careful to put too much restrictions on that system. Yet, on the other hand, we now have a society that's extraordinarily, controlling, of information, especially in this area, especially in the medical community. And so as I look at that, and also from the perspective of being a policy, what is really happening is that government panels that come out with these reports of like their guidelines or recommendations and that, actually the government doesn't have a voice of their own. They are owned by industry. Okay, so that cabal, I call it, between industry and government, they're the ones that come out with all the information. And we, people in science, good friends, good people, a lot of the people in my area, they can do the research if they get the money. And they have to get, and the money they get, that kind of feeds into the system that we already know. We can work on a lot of details and say this and that and confuse everybody, but we're not dealing with a big problem. So you see, the control is in all of our institutions, and it's in our culture and that sort of thing. And I'm not sure that we have really told the science quite the right way yet. I'm taking a stab at it. I'm going to send you a copy, John. You have to take a look at it and give me your opinion. But it's really very much down the lines that you and I are talking about. And I think I like it in a way that's kind of convincing. And what I would say is that the government needs to get out of the business of trying to control the knowledge. They have a big voice. You know that.
Yeah, I guess I have a little different. The government is something I don't pay a lot of attention to, but I have to say that when I look at what I'm fed as far as medical information through the medical journals, I have to say that fake news is a reality. When 70% of the nutrition articles and 70% of the medical articles are paid for by vested interests, that's fake news. Those are alternative facts being used. I'm sorry, it relates to an administration that most of us have a serious disdain for, but that we've been lied to, Colin. The American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, the Journal of Nutrition, the Journal of the American Medical Association, the New England Journal of Medicine, the British Medical Journal. I mean, these journals are owned basically by industry. And so what chance does a dietitian or a nutritionist or a medical doctor have?
Well, that on dietitians, by the way, there's two communities in my area. One is nutritional science, if you will. The other is dietitians. We kind of mix and match and work together to some extent. But I think, John, that the Dietitian Society, the American Dietetic Association, now it's called the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, A&D. I'm sure you know that organization. A great organization in terms of what they've been doing historically and getting young people sort of informed about nutrition, going out and tell the story. But that organization is basically controlled by the industry. It really is. I mean, the dairy industry is in that. And so, we're all part of it. We're all in this sort of cage, in a sense. And
But there is an out, Colin, and that is, the Canadian Dietetic Association.
Yeah, they did. That's true.
Took a stand last month where they ignored the livestock industry and basically gave them a voting capacity of the individual citizen. And they had to purposely go out of their way to exclude the dairy and the meat industry from any decision making. So it can be done. There are honest people. The information is there. The Canadian guidelines are a really huge step forward to what you and I believe in. And any other questions for Dr. Colin Campbell? We have a little bit of time left, so type them in on the chat. We'll get them through Dr. Campbell, through Gustavo, and this is your opportunity.
Yeah, we do have some questions, actually, Dr. McDougall.
Well, why don't we hear those questions? Because I've stimulated a lot of interest from this young man.
We have several people asking about two topics. One is your thoughts on the keto diet, and another one is on AFib.
Okay, two things. On the keto diet, if the video is still around, I tell them, go look at a video that Dr. McDougall had, who was a Barry Sears at the time. You kind of laid on the line, John, and I still remember that. I was there in person at the time. And but broadly speaking, the keto diet is fake news, as John said. It really is. It's true. It basically is. Started out with Atkins' argument, as Dr. McDougall knows so well, that we're consuming too much sugar. We're cutting down fat, and we're consuming too much sugar, and you got to cut the sugar down. That came out with the low carb diet, but with the low carb diet taking up such a minor fraction of the total calories, we end up with a diet high in fat and high in protein, and there's where the motivation was. From my perspective, the keto diet really had a bit of a history in the last 20, 30 years. And really the bottom line was those folks really wanted to protect the high fat, high animal protein diet that people have become accustomed to. And as John, you said, people like to hear good things about their bad habits. You're the first person I heard say that. And so it produces obviously so-called ketone bodies in that high protein, high fat. And it attenuates to some extent appetite for a while. So people can lose all the weight if they've got weight to lose, and that oppresses them, and so forth and so on. Maybe cholesterol might come down a shade, but it's not a lifetime deal. That's John, I like the word. It's fake news that lasts, or maybe at the best, for a few months. People quit it. If they don't quit it, they're going to have problems anyhow if they live it out. So all we need to do is to look at the consumption of, let's say, animal protein and fat across different societies, we already know that, for a lifetime. And that line's a straight line relationship as far as animal protein is concerned. In the book, I put some of that in there. That's a straight sort of linear regression right up from the origin, the XY origin. And so the keto diet is actually trying to keep us entrapped in the Western diet that we've been struggling with for all this time. And so, and as I say, you can see a lot of short-term effects sometimes for the oddest things.
Well, you and I have been around a lot. I mean, you probably met Dr. Atkins. I had the chance to meet him.
You didn't meet him. But.
Yeah, I did meet him. I was in the year 2000. I was at the World Nutrition Conference in Washington D.C. And you know, the only regret I have about that conference is I was sitting next to him in front of about 500 cameras worldwide. We were doing this USDA nutrition conference in 2000. And I told Mary, I said, you know, when Dr. Atkins says his diet is efficient and easy to do, I'm going to say to him, because I'm sitting right next to him, I'm going to say to him, okay, chubby, stand up and take off your coat and let us see how efficient it is and how easy it is to do. Because at that time, he was about 60 pounds overweight. He died shortly afterwards of heart disease. Anyway, yeah, so we've been there. Colin, we've been there. We've done that. I mean, that was the 1970s. We met, you know, shortly after that. And things have gone from a pendulum of, you know, we almost made it with Dennis Burkett and Pritikin, and high carbohydrate diets like you and I know are true. But somehow or another, those people from the meat and dairy industry, they just keep on going forward. I don't know. Your son, Tom, is a medical doctor. You and I share so much together. People need to know. You know, you've had a lifelong friend as a wife, like I have, and you have grandchildren, and you have a young son who's a doctor like Craig, my son. You have another son who works in the administrative part of the business like my daughter, Heather. You know, we had a pretty good life, you and I did. What do you see for? I mean, are you as worried as I am about the kids and the grandkids, and you know how we're going to stop this runaway business that's eating the planet to death?
You're absolutely right.
I mean, what's going to happen, Dr. T. Colin Campbell? You're 85 years old. You've seen so much. There's nothing like age and experience. And almost everybody listening doesn't have the age and experience that you have. So tell us the future.
Well, this doesn't look good, John. I'm glad you brought that question up because, you know, if we don't using the kind of diet you and I are talking about, we got two major problems, plus many more, but I think of two at least. One is the fact that our environment is going to hell in a handbasket. I mean, the kind of food that we're advocating against is the same kind of food that causes much of the environmental problems: global warming, contamination of water, and so forth. So the environmental issue is a big one. The other one is cost of health care. You know, the politicians are always arguing about, you know, how to reduce costs. It's so high. I think they like those high costs because they're living off of our diseases. We have a disease care system, as you know, and that's what makes the business go.
That's
and
where the money is.
You know, if we, yeah, you're right. If we just said, you know, if we could somehow get this information out there in a format that the public could really understand and use, we could save healthcare costs, tremendous amount of healthcare costs. We could turn the needle around on that environmental problem. My grandson, we've got grandsons now already going through school. One of my grandsons, I should take this opportunity to say, we're going to have another certificate course, like a plant-based nutrition. We're going to have another certificate course on food and environment. And he's just finished putting all this together. He's a millennial, you know, like a lot of them that are young people. And, you know, they get caught up in this environmental thing because they know what's coming down the pike.
You know, they ought to, you know, I see that. But I also remember that we went through a time where we were in the streets burning our draft cards. You remember those days, Colin?
Doing what? I didn't hear that.
There were days when we were in the streets burning our draft cards. You know, I don't understand why the youth of today isn't out in the streets burning. I don't know. What are they going to do? Cook a roast beef sandwich? Burn their roast beef? I don't know why the young people of today don't realize. I guess because nobody has a threat to take and send them off to Vietnam. You know, they're not scared enough. They're still comfortable sitting in front of their video games. They don't think this is really happening. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have sons and daughters and grandchildren, you need to get them prepared. They need to be in the streets. They need to get this revolution going, because every prediction I hear says that, no, we were wrong. It's going to happen sooner and more severe than we ever predicted, and that's global destruction. Get out there and protest. Get out there in the streets. It's your world to save.
Yeah, some of that information
We may have ruined it. Our parents may have ruined it, but it doesn't matter. It's all we got, and I think it's time to burn your bras. Get whatever it takes.
You're still the same John as you ever were.
I'm still, until they cut me off, I'm going to stay the same. You too, Colin. You've never hesitated. What time for one more question, Gustavo, or do we need to?
A couple of questions for Dr. Campbell. One is more, I guess, fun, personal question is, Dr. Campbell, what do you eat in a regular day? Number two, are you involved with the American Institute of Cancer Research in any way?
Yes. As far as what I eat, it's the same thing as what you guys do, I guess. I like to describe it mostly as whole foods. We don't need the nutrients out of context. These are whole foods, mix and match. We can use the spices and herbs to give them the flavors we might like, and we get used to it fairly quickly. Both of you know that, and then you look back, you don't want to have it before. So when I say whole foods, I'm talking about vegetables, fruits, grains, any mix and match you like. Everybody can, they have their favorites, and just as long as it's that, and don't be adding animal protein into the diet. I mean, that's the way I look at it. I mean, coming from the protein world as I did, I have to say that our choice to eat animal foods way back when was not a very good choice. And we don't need that. We get all the protein we need from plant foods. So that's my diet. As far as the American Institute for Cancer Research is concerned, in some ways, I almost feel like a founder of that. Just a couple of guys were going out in the mail and raising some money, and you got a woman at the time that was actually a friend, in a sense, a younger friend of mine, from a little town in Virginia. And so they asked me if I would come along and help them. So I was their senior science advisor and put together a research program. They raised a lot of money in the beginning. And we had a good time. We did a lot of different things. They actually raised an extraordinary amount of money. It was early in the days when they were using the mails to raise money. And that was not quite kosher. They got some trouble with that. And then when I joined them, I got in lots of trouble. Again, hearing from not just the meat and dairy industry, but more of the attorney general's offices. And so that organization took off now. It's a fairly distinguished organization. I think they've raised about $600 million since they first started in the middle 80s. So I was very much involved with them. I think they didn't quite want to go where I went to, and so we kind of parted ways after about 15 years or so. I guess I was going too far to McDougall territory.
Oh, I corrupted you. I'm sorry. People need to know that you also are very physically active. You do cross-country skiing. You're out there playing with the grandkids. You're a very active man. And I know exercise is important for you, and sunshine's important, and good food, which is a whole food, plant-based diet, that's the way you describe it, is important. I think people want to know about your supplement intake. How are you with supplements?
I don't see any need for them at all. I was deeply involved in that at one point in the middle of the 1980s. I was a member of the National Academy of Science panel that did the report, Diet, Nutrition, Cancer. And we described in that report basically whole foods. That's what we're talking about. And we explicitly said this does not apply to supplements. And this is in the early days before the supplement industry really much started. And so they came out, there's some young engaging entrepreneurs came out and they wanted to make an industry out of what we said. Took out full-page ads on Time, Newsweek, and U.S. News and World Report. That all of a sudden this panel, gave attention, said the diet was important, but they made it clear that made it sound like, we were really all for supplements. So the Academy actually asked me, the Academy was upset with this. They asked me to be their principal witness on behalf of the Academy to go to the Federal Trade Commission hearings to challenge the industry who wanted to do that. So I was the key witness for 3 years, sitting in the docket and listening to all these guys wanting to, push their supplements because they said our report said that. I said, no, it didn't. No, that went on for a while. And I really got to know, again, what went on there as they were pushing their stuff. I mean, I wasn't 100%. I said, well, the only way we're going to know this, we're going to have to test it. You've got to be good science. Okay, we'll do science. I'll change my mind if that's appropriate, but that's the way it was. And so they then rigged a couple of regulations in the government to make it possible for them to put those products on the market. The so-called Deshay Amendment of 1994, for example, the claims made on supplements. And so finally, we watched, these papers coming out over the years, the research coming out on the use of supplements for this, that, and everything else. And quite frankly, from my perspective, they've been studied to death just about at this point in time. And so now we have, meta-analysis, we call it, where some researchers get together, might pick up maybe 50 to 60, maybe 100 or so different studies, average them all together and see what we got. We don't have anything, really. Now I say science and what's said to be the best form, I guess, I don't know. But science does not support the claims they're making. Yeah. It's clear. And only B12. I think B12 is, I'm not convinced of that whole story, but I listen to my clinical friends tell me they got to go with it. I don't know, John, where you are on that, but I'll go with B12. But
I want to avoid all controversy, and B12 is the only one I can think of.
Okay.
So I'll just give them their B12 and let them stay on their own.
Right.
That's kind of interesting. People need to realize, even though the science is clear, and I have to say, every one that I've read, every one of the meta-analysis studies, every one of the recent large works on vitamin supplementation show that it does more harm than good. We're talking clearly about vitamin D, clearly about omega-3 fats. I mean, they're the ones that have been most heavily studied.
That's right.
But there's so much money. I figure it's just like, unfortunately, I watch too much of headline news and cable TV and the commercials that come out. I figure that no matter what they're selling, auto insurance for repairs on your car, or back surgery, or whatever gimmick they're selling, all they got to do is they got to just sell it to 1 out of every 100 listeners. And they still make a profit because they make these pills so, for less than pennies a piece. And if you can sell them to the gullible customer, which they do, everybody wants an easy way out. They want to hear, I can eat my steak and bacon and my pizza. Just give me a little bit of antioxidant. It's a high margin business. Basically, is what it is. And rice and potatoes aren't.
That's right. Right, absolutely.
Dr. McDougall.
Yes, Gustavo.
And we have people claiming here for a question. Please, even if it's briefly, would you address the topic?
If you have the patience, Gustavo, and are kind enough to let Dr. Campbell and I continue for a couple of more minutes.
Sure.
You can always turn us off. Let's hear some questions for
in
Dr.
the back
Campbell.
of your mind to, at some point, talk a little bit about atrial fibrillation.
Well, but let me answer that because it's a medical question. Atrial fibrillation is due to atherosclerosis of the small arteries that go to the heart, not the big ones, so you can't see it on an angiogram. I've written a whole bunch of stuff. You can go to my website, put in atrial fibrillation. There's a whole article I did on AFib, and it tells you about it. But that's kind of out of Dr. Campbell's field, unless you want to add something to it, Dr. Campbell.
Yeah, hey, John, yeah. I don't know why I said this to you, but I'm not a clinician, so I don't know details of that. But about, what was it, email from someone who was at the Atrial Fibrillation Conference in Vancouver.
Oh, yeah. Well, John Madrola, we had. Yeah.
Well, he got an award or something. Most interesting, but I read he got the transcript of some of the stuff that he did. He told a story about how he got some 70-some patients to read the China study.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of them, again, around 80% or something like that, they could turn it around. You know, like you're in our kind of diet. So I did get drug into that area without just hearing it. You know, works on that too.
Well, you know, I'd be pleased to hear that. The primary work comes out of the Framingham study from Framingham, Massachusetts. But anyway, it's a little bit off topic. Well, we're getting the next question up. I want to go back to this cancer thing because that's what you're most known about, is that you believe that you can turn on and turn off cancer genes by reducing the intake of animal protein. Does anybody agree with you?
No, not very much. It's been a struggle, but and not. If I talk about protein, that's a bit of a problem. But some of the principles of cancer formation, I'm particularly interested in. I, for example, noticed and have seen this for years, as you know, probably John too. Cancer is called a genetic disease. That's big, bold letters right on the website of the National Cancer Institute. The entire industry has us believing that all the time. It's a genetic disease. So therefore, if it's a genetic disease, and since genes do not back mutate, they don't go backwards in a sense, and cancer starts with mutations, and now we know there's lots of mutations may cause that. So if that is happening, and if they're not repaired before they divide, then that new information is recorded in the second generation cells. Now we got an infant cancer cell, if you will. And it can't go back. It can't go back. The body has a couple of mechanisms to work on that, and that does a good job in most cases, like DNA repair in that sense before it becomes a mutation, or these natural killer cell activity from the immune system will kill cells. Anyhow, here's what it is. I disagree strongly, and I've written a paper on this. The cancer is a genetic disease. It is not. Because if it is, and that assumption that it's a genetic disease, the only way you can treat it is to kill the cancer cells. And you can do it by chemotherapy, surgery, and radiotherapy. So nutrition doesn't come into the playground, John. And what we did with our research with the animals, I mean, pretty remarkable. I didn't expect to see this. We could turn cancer on by just giving them more protein, casein in this case. We could turn it off by just dropping it down to the levels where protein is reasonable, or replacing it with plant proteins. We could turn on and turn off cancer by nutritional means. So and we looked at it in many other ways too. So I come back to my point I said in the beginning. It's not a genetic disease. It's a nutritional disease.
Well, you saw this when you did the China study, and you found no breast cancer in Chinese women who ate a diet of 7% fat. Is that correct?
That's right. That was very much in support. Exactly.
And in the country of China, right, as people moved to the city and adapted the Western diet as they have since 1980, breast cancer has become common, just like type 2 diabetes and obesity and so on. It's become a common disease. You have another question, Gustavo?
Yeah, I do. People are asking about other types of fats, like tofu or avocado or nuts.
Yeah, what do you think about that? Especially since our good friend Caldwell Esselstyn has made his reputation for telling people not to eat nuts and seeds and stuff.
I don't agree with this on that. We go back and forth. Obviously, we're very good friends, as you are. But his argument is, one time we were on a stage together and we asked that one question, and each of us had to give our answers. Here's what Dr. Esselstyn basically said on that occasion. Look, I was working with heart disease patients, and I got the results I got. You know, why am I going to now change things and say something different? I'm working with patients. You know, so okay. I'm not going to challenge him on his work, and his results are spectacular, fantastic results. But on the other hand, as the research has unfolded since then, I believe that nuts are fine because it's a whole food to start with, and if you start thinking about the growth of the tree that has the nuts or the other kinds of nuts that we have, those products are put there by the plant to save their genes for some other future time to grow the next generation. And so they're basically protected with it. There's a lot of energy there in those nuts, so they can get a quick start when they're put in the soil and all that sort of stuff. But that energy can basically, or the fat, if you will, the fat can become rancid in theory. I think it's kind of a neat idea from nature because what it did, it wrapped it in a lot of antioxidants. That's the way I'm sort of looking at it. So now you have a food product that, yes, got some fat in there. That's true. And a lot of times those fats are omega-3s, they're more better. But on top of it, they got all the antioxidants. They're a rich source of vitamin E. You put the whole package together, and my take on that is nature, I think, knew what it was doing.
Yeah, nature doesn't make very many mistakes, does she?
No, that's where I am. So, but I do also understand Dr. Esselstyn, And,
yeah. Well, what people have to realize, is that essentially we agree on the basic components of the diet. And if you follow what I recommend or you recommend or Ornish or Esselstyn or Nathan Pritikin or, you can go back to Daniel, the first chapter of the Bible. I mean, this is old information. If people want to contact you in the future, are you still out speaking? Are you doing many engagements?
Yes, I am. I've done enough. I'm not doing it quite as much as I did. I'm not really looking for opportunities for sure. If something comes along that, it's the right group maybe, or I hate to say that, that's not a very nice thing to say, but, if there's a decent number of.
Well, I know how you feel, Colin, because,
yeah, it's a little hard.
So the similarities between you and I mean, I've been pushing as you have to try and get people to open their eyes and understand this simple message. And, I'm at the point in my life where, I'm ready to tell you again, and I'm sure you are too, if people would be, they'd be generous enough for themselves and their families and the world and so on to take this time to stop and listen before it's too late. But until the public comes out and starts asking, okay, what do we do to fix this problem? I find it an impossible barrier. They plain and simple, and again, they're just people. We're all just people. It's not a conspiracy. And, it's just that we have an opportunity looking forward to us that if we don't take it, the consequences are beyond belief. And
yeah.
So let's ask those who are religious out there to pray that somehow God turns around, starts listening to this side of the fence, and saves this beautiful planet. If you flip coins or whatever you do to try and get luck on your side, Dr. Campbell and I and the rest of our team want to talk to you. It's a simple, cost-free message, and Dr. Campbell has dedicated his entire life, as he's caused his family to do, his wife and his children, to try and convey the truth. And you know what? This is a man, I could say, has done it without any hesitation, without blinking his eyes, without thinking of his own welfare at all, because the truth, as his parents told him, is of paramount importance, just like my parents told me. Unfortunately, we were both raised with that, you may call it a handicap, of only being able to tell the truth as we see it. And Dr. Campbell, it's just a pleasure to talk to a man that I know will give answers the best he knows and from his heart. And I've known you for a long time, and I can say without a doubt this is a person who cares about his fellow human beings and the planet and all the right things. There are good guys in the world, and Dr. Colin Campbell is one of those really great guys. And it's been just a real opportunity to have you as a good friend and colleague. Thank you, Dr. Colin Campbell.
Yeah, and also saying the same, Joe, we said a few times, and I'm totally impressed about you is you're going out there and saying it like it is. That's what you did.
Well, I think it's the problem of either no sense or no fear. Because you and I both confront our colleagues right to their faces and tell them exactly how it is without any risk of retribution. So we're either really, really, really stupid and taking the wrong route because obviously we haven't changed the world like we want, or.
But we did it. We did our best. We actually, John, we can end up. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. I'm just trying to think about what I'm trying to say. I mean, we did our best. We really did, and the public is changing, but we need more help.
Yeah. Okay. It's a great message. Anyhow, that's what people need to know. It's health. It's just good feelings.
It is the biggest problem. Well, I argued with you have good friends and very smart friends like I do. And I argue that global warming is the greatest threat to the planet. But, they come back and they'll say, well, no, it's nuclear destruction. And it's hard to argue. I mean, we're on the verge of a lot of catastrophes. And we sit and worry about it getting hit by a comet or some other cosmic event that happens every 10 million years. And we're sitting and facing, two opportunities of surviving or becoming extinct right now. And
it could be.
It's an exciting time to live. I can't say other people have suffered a lot too during their times, but our time certainly will go down in history as one of the more exciting times. But act! Time to act! Thank you, Dr. Campbell.
Thank you, John.
And Gustavo, as always, thank you for your dedication to getting this message out to people.
My pleasure.
So, I wanted to ask, how do people get in contact with you, Dr. Campbell? I didn't get the answer.
Well, okay, that's nutritionstudies.org. We have the online course, and we're doing some other things, and I got some really nice staff working there. So, yeah, go nutritionstudies, all one word, .org.
Okay, and, that's the name of the website.
Yeah. That's the website, yeah.
Okay. Hopefully it has your speaking schedule on it. I wish I could keep up with you. You are an amazing guy. All the travel you do all over the place, obviously you're doing something right. Thank you very much, Dr. Campbell. Thank you very much, Dr. Tolosa. And folks, we'll join you again in a couple of weeks with another interesting guest. In the meantime, keep in touch with us at drmcdougall.com. And come to our upcoming 3-day weekend, which is the March 8th through 10th, 2019 in Santa Rosa, California. Mary and I will be there. Heather, our daughter, has scheduled 3 lectures for me. 3 lectures! Well, that's okay. I'm up for it. And you're such a great audience. I can hardly wait to see you. So anyways, that's our next event. Will be March 8th through 10th. It's a 3-day weekend. And we have all kinds of 10-day programs. If you need some serious medical care, if you're tired of taking drugs, you're tired of facing a very bleak future, you want to get on track, and it's not easy to make dietary changes, then come spend 10 days with us in Santa Rosa, California at the McDougall program. We're here to help. But do remember, everything is free on the website, including a Spanish edition of the Stark Solution. So, it's not like you can't have it all for free. You can, but Dr. Campbell, Dr. Esselstyn, Dr. Ornish, Dr. Bernard, et cetera, and our respective families are here to help. We really are. I mean, you look at our side of the team and you go, my goodness, they got to be doing something right. They look good. They're enthused. They seem honest. You look at the other team and they're fat and sick and they're a bunch of damn liars. And cheats and polluters, and they can go to hell. I guess that's a good way to end. I'm Dr. John McDougall.